culture in which there's great confusion almost everywhere over what it means to be a Christian. Do you believe that? There's confusion everywhere. I've shared similar things with you before. But according to a recent Gallup survey, I found this interesting. It lines up with what we've talked about in previous times. According to a recent Gallup survey, 78% of Americans identify themselves as Christians. 78%. That sound about right to you? Give you the rest of the data here. About 15% of Americans claim they have no religion. Although just to really provide you with some more information even there, that number absolutely skyrockets for people beneath the age of 29. We're really in the midst of raising up a generation of people who do not know and are not interested in God. And about 5 or 6% of Americans claim a non-Christian religious identity. 78%. That's the often cited basis, by the way, for America's perceived status in the world as a so-called Christian nation. You've certainly heard that myth, right? I've got to tell you that if you look objectively at our nation, at our culture, Christian is probably not a word that you would use to describe it. Is it? Our governing institutions are certainly not Christian, haven't been for years. It was a time, but not for years. In fact, increasingly our governing institutions are now self-describing themselves as being non-Christian. President Obama, remember in 2009, famously stated, he was doing a press conference in Turkey of all places, and he famously stated that Americans do not consider ourselves a Christian nation. That was a reiteration of him having said basically the same thing in 2007. That is his conviction. As shocking a statement, I think, as that was to most of us, to be fair to the president, it's merely a reflection of what's been the official, unofficial national policy of America for years now, for a couple of generations. Take some time and check some of the laws that have been passed. Take some time and look at court decisions. Even check most local school board policies that are relevant to the topic, and you'll find that today the true religion of America is secularism. It's secularism because it's what the government recognizes as being okay, as being non-offensive. And it's secularism, by the way, that has essentially taught us dogma in most of our schools and universities, right? It is, from a very early age. I think that once you understand that there's good reason to be confused, or be confused no longer anyway, about our nation's self-identity crisis. It's pretty easy to see what the problem is. We may think that as a nation we're Christian, but the reality is that there's no authentication of that. There's no fruit. There's nothing that proves that to be true. That's evident, by the way, because as a culture, there's really not any real understanding of what it even means to be Christian. Now, bear in mind, 78% of Americans consider themselves to be Christian. But if you ask the public at large what it means to be Christian, take that question to them, you'll be stunned at the answers that you'll hear. Most often, being a Christian is defined as being a good person. And if that were really true, we'd all be in trouble because the Bible says there are none good. Occasionally, being a Christian is described, in fact, this is fairly common, being a Christian is described as having attended a church. Now, that one kind of puzzled me because we know that maybe only a fraction of Americans, a very small fraction of Americans, attend church, right, on a given Sunday. Yet 78% say they're Christian, and so it's hard to see how attendance of church can be an identity factor. But then I looked at the way that they determined that data, that little piece of data, and they actually opened that up to where you could call yourself one who attended church even if you'd only attended in the last year for something like a wedding or a funeral. That's a startling new way to identify yourself as a Christian, right? Went to a wedding. Of course, the identity is even very often claimed through family identity, through birth. Some churches practice pedobaptism. You know, that means that you baptize babies. Periodically, we get phone calls. I'll get a phone call at an office from a mother or a father asking if we baptize babies. Of course, we don't. The reason being that baptism is reserved. If you read the Scriptures, it's reserved for believers. To be a believer, you have to be old enough to understand and to be able to acquire the truth, and so we don't do that. But another reason why it's important not to do that is because that's one of the things that causes people really not to understand the gospel. You know, a lot of people out there who think that they're Christians, and they're going to be really, really surprised if they don't change their ways and repent before the end of life to get to heaven and to explain to the Lord that on the basis of their having been baptized as an infant that they thought they were okay. Being a good person does not make you a Christian. Attending church occasionally does not make you a Christian. Claiming Christian identity through baptism or through family or anything else, that doesn't make you a Christian. But if you understand that, it's all of those factors that really contribute to a better understanding of where Christians, so-called, are coming from in America. The reality is that the vast, vast majority of Christians in America, again, self-identified Christians, are people who we would describe not as true Christians, but as notional Christians. Notional Christians. They have this notion that they're saved. They have this notion that they believe or that they know Christ. But they're lacking substance. The fact is that when you apply some very basic criteria, you'll find the truth. George Barna is a Christian pollster, and he actually asks a better battery of questions about the Christian faith than, say, Gallup does. And Barna subdivides that 70 or 80%. He subdivides that then into some other categories. I think that Barna will recognize a group that's called born-agains. And you might say, okay, those are the true Christians, but then if you look at what they believe, they're really not the true Christians. Then he has the subcategory under born-agains. He has evangelical Christians. And it's at that point in time that you're probably talking about people who have enough relevant understanding to be categorized as real believers. And if you follow Barna's recent statistics, he says that evangelical Christians constitute only about 7% of America's population. What is an evangelical Christian? Well, that's someone who believes the gospel. Someone who believes in the shed blood and the atoning sacrifice of Jesus Christ as being the only way to be saved from sin. But then you need to add to that the understanding that an evangelical also believes in this book. They believe that it's objective truth, that it's divinely inspired, inerrant truth. 7% of Americans believe that, at least ways by the poll. But that number, by the way, has been steadily declining for years. If you went back 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, you would have found that to be much higher. And so I bring this to your attention just so you understand that the state of the culture in America, when it has to do with Christianity, is in a state of decline. It's really in a state of very rapid decline. And the problem really is about ignorance. People in this country don't know what it is to be a Christian. They don't even know that they're the problem. They don't even understand what Christianity is about. It's a national tragedy. Certainly, I know that you would agree with that. But I do want to suggest to you today that we're in danger of experiencing an even greater tragedy, and that is what I would tell you is the thing that's going on in the church today. The greater tragedy that you find in the church today is that the church has begun to trace the downward trajectory of the culture. We've opened up the doors and we're inviting the world in, and not in a way through which they can receive the gospel and be saved. We're inviting them in through compromise. I think the most single frightening indicator that is out there, that is at least ways to me, that is of the greatest concern, is the reality that evangelical Christians, read here, the true Christian church in America, the reality is that the evangelical, the true church, is heading in disastrous general direction. The most single frightening indicator of this is the indication that's found in another recent survey conducted among evangelicals that indicated that almost a third of them, almost a third of the people who would self-identify as evangelicals, do not believe in absolute truth. And so remember, we started out at 78%, right? And then we came down, I think the born-again number is, I don't know, it's around 30 or 40%. Then the evangelical number is 7%. But then you have 30% of that 7% who say that they don't believe in absolute truth. You know what that means? It means that they cannot truly believe in the Bible. It means that they really cannot rightly claim to even be saved or to know Christ. Because by rejecting absolute truth, it's not really just a matter of what they're rejecting. The matter really that's relevant is who they're rejecting. Jesus, remember, identified himself as the truth. You say absolute truth doesn't exist. Listen, you are sweeping aside the claims of Jesus Christ. And so even for many within the church, the claims of the gospel of Christ are in doubt. By the way, you can see the effects of this within the church culture, not the secular culture, but you can see the effects within the church culture everywhere today. You're seeing it increasingly as you look around. The thing that you find is that the Bible is being forsaken. And really, beyond just that rather benign way of forsaking the Bible, there are churches today that actually deliberately are de-emphasizing the Bible. And they're doing this, by the way, in favor of just about anything else. Cause politics are popular in our time. I said cause politics. Churches in pursuit of an environmental agenda or, any number of other things. Cause politics. The social gospel is everywhere. I think the social gospel, let me kind of try to describe this for you. The social gospel basically probably starts out with pretty good motivation. People go out and they say, we want to take the gospel to the world, but we want to feed it first. See the problem there? They've flipped it. They've made the mistake of placing man's physical needs over his spiritual needs. The social gospel, though, is popular, I think, today, really because it helps people to salve their conscience, particularly in this country, but the social gospel is absolutely everywhere. In fact, the whole emergent church movement, really, that's its dogma, is the social gospel. The prosperity movement is everywhere. This is the stuff that's taken over Christian TV. This is a really virulent form of heresy. Basically, it says, God is who you say he is. You define God in your own way, and then you have the ability to tell him what to do.